The choice was this deal, which enables us to take back control and to build a brighter future for our country, or going back to square one, with more division, more uncertainty, and a failure to deliver on the referendum.
Hello and welcome to Telegraph Towers. I'm Bennett, part of the Brexit team, and I have the pleasure to have with me my dear colleague James Rothwell.
What was interesting about this week is that as soon as the reports started coming out that we'd got this deal, Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg were very quick in getting in front of a TV camera and saying this just isn't going to work.
We're going to stay effectively in large parts of the single market, and that means it's vassal state stuff.
She hasn't so much struck a deal as surrendered to Brussels and given in to them on everything that they want.
Both of them have been saying that for months and months and months. Everybody knows what the Brexiteers' oppositions are to this deal. And I wonder if the more they express their opposition so loudly and forcefully, if there is not an element of diminishing returns. People maybe get a little bit tired of hearing the same thing over and over again, and they become more interested in hearing from the Prime Minister or from the Prime Minister's supporters.
Can I say to my honourable friend that what we have been negotiating is a deal that does deliver on the vote of the British people?
Let's remember, to be frank, some of the Brexiteers have not proposed very concrete alternatives to Mrs May's deal.
Yes.
They have put alternatives on the table, like the Super Canada arrangement, or the Canada plus deal. But we know, having looked at these deals, that they too have got flaws and they have got problems that wouldn't work within
they are in
the limits of reality.
Not on the table, and as Dom Raab has said
Exactly.
before, a shortcut to a no deal in his view. Actually, it's interesting on that vein because Jacob Rees-Mogg has argued in the past, saying, oh, no deal's perfectly doable, it should be great. He really talked it up. But recently, he started to modulate his tone.
I think we should be making announcements now about how we would deal with leaving on World Trade Organization terms.
He started to say, okay, in a no-deal scenario, what we would do is we'd pay 19 billion, we'd have certain bilateral deals, the infamous managed no deal, which we'd agree some little mini
no
deals.
deal plus, right?
Yes.
That kind of thing. Yeah.
And so if you scratch beneath the surface, it does seem that the ERG are quietly realizing, oh, well, no deal, we don't really like this. This can't really happen. We have to try to soften the blow somehow. So and I'm not trying to accuse them of being frit, but I'm just saying that they may be thinking twice about whether they can really drive the government down this path with how they react. Because as they'd acknowledge, and we would acknowledge too, the government hasn't done enough to prepare for no deal. It's just a weirdly self-fulfilling prophecy. They haven't done enough, so they must therefore try and power this deal through.
I think that's a really fair point. The other thing that interests me, I don't know about you, Asa, about this no deal stuff, is that we know that this deal is not going to satisfy an awful lot of people, no matter what concessions Mrs May is able to extract at the last minute. And some of the problems with this deal might be really serious. Let's just assume, for the sake of argument, that this deal will always tie Northern Ireland to the customs union forever, and there's just no way of getting out of that. And also to EU rules, the regulatory border, the rest of it. Do Leavers, even Remainers, really want to see a United Kingdom that has a fairly an integral part of it carved off and put under de facto EU jurisdiction? Do they really want to see that? If that's the only way of doing Brexit with a deal, then the question is, well, maybe we do have to start looking pretty seriously at no deal. It would be no deal, but essentially a point where we just go, look, chaps, this isn't working out. We need a cooling off period. Let's get all of our emergency provisions in place. Let's see what the chaos brings and the extent to which we can cope with it. And then, just for the sake of argument, maybe sort of 3 months down the line, come back to the table. That's an idea that's often kind of rejected quite quickly because people go, oh no, there would be chaos, we wouldn't be able to handle it. But look at this from a long-term perspective. Sure, like a couple of months or years of chaos would be very, very bad for the economy, as people rightly argue. But the permanent exile of Northern Ireland forever is also a pretty serious consequence, and you have to weigh up the short-term cost and the long-term cost and see which one people would rather swallow.
Absolutely. And so as a final question, maybe just to look ahead to where we are going, given that when Parliament comes to assess it, likely in December before Christmas, I mean, do you feel then, the House of Lords, to my mind, was what I understand when I speak to ministers, they seem quietly confident that obviously the Commons is the big hurdle because the Lords is not going to stand in the way. Any idea that Lord Adonis might scupper things at the last minute is a bit of a distraction.
Can't see Lord Adonis, right?
Quite right.
Running the ship
as much as the Remainers could, because they have to bow to the might of the Commons. So once we expect that to be done, potentially, then everything is smoothed over. So do you feel, and obviously predictions are a mug's game, but nonetheless, let's play it, that we will be leaving broadly on time then March 29th? Or will it have to be sort of, will there be a delay, extensions? What do you think? Will it be with a deal?
I will happily indulge you in your request for a foolhardy prediction. If the Cabinet and the MPs approve the deal and it goes to the Lords, I would expect the Lords would agree on it as well, and that means that we would come out in March 2019. The reason I think the Lords would be reluctant to throw too much of a spanner in the works is that extending Article 50 is potentially a time-consuming and arduous process, and we would only need to do it if we had very, very fundamental oppositions to, say, the backstop. The fact that we seem to have a deal now on the terms of divorce would suggest that at least at the very highest levels of government, the opposition, the fundamental opposition to the backstop no longer exists. I'm not sure the Lords would want to stay in the way of that, but what do you think?
Well, I say finally that obviously if the Lords did try and kick up a fuss, they'd basically be writing their own death sentence. It would be, sort of a case for abolition. The Jacob Rees-Mogg and the ERG have made this case before about trying to stand in the way. They are aware of this, and so all in all, I think the biggest thing that might save the day for the government is the fantastic fudge that is in the political agreement, in which they're holding the door just open enough so it's a sort of like an ink blot in a sense. You look at it, you see what you want to, in a sense.
Oh, like the Rorschach test.
Yes, it looks like Rorschach Canada. Test. It looks like checkers. Yeah. Who knows? Yeah. But even then, all that said, we could obviously talk about this for hours. So thank you for tuning in, because for all we know, the next time you watch, we may be in full general election territory or second referendum. Who knows in this wild game of Brexit?